Alright, hi guys, I want to talk to you about color theory using paint. I have already started and gotten yellow and red in their boxes. I am going to use a paper towel to get most of my red off and go straight on to blue. I would like to talk to you guys about the pigments. There's more pigment in red than there is in yellow, and more pigment in blue than there is in red. And those do affect how you mix your colors, as well as sometimes I have it affect the color that I do in order, so I don't have to get my brush wet to rinse it out. You should be aware that you really don't need more paint than this. Your paint should never ever touch this ferrule. You can see that this brush has already had somebody do that because it's sort of dark near the edge, which means that there's actually paint still in there that hasn't been able to get out because it got too high on the bristles. If it happens as an accident, it's not that big of a deal, but if you're doing it regularly, your brushes will wear out and you will start to not have the full use of the bristles. In this exercise, we're just aiming for a nice thin coat that goes edge to edge, and practicing staying inside the lines. As artists, oftentimes we talk about not staying in the lines, but with this one we're practicing doing that because for the project we're going to be creating with this, you're creating your own lines. You want to stay in them because we're going to have complementary colors right next to each other. In the video after we do the color wheel, you'll see why, when your complementary colors are right next to each other, why you don't want them to mix and you want to be able to stay in the lines. We'll talk about how it makes them muddy and it makes them less intense, and we're going for intensity here today. Normally I would have my paper not taped down. I taped it down so it doesn't leave the area of the camera without accidentally making you miss out on something. So the idea is to be neat. I'm not as neat as I could be if I was actually turning my paper. So I've got my yellow, my red, and my blue. These are our primary colors. We have to buy them. We can't mix them. I'm going to use, because I already have blue on here, I'm going to go straight to making green, which you'll see me mix on this palette here. There are multiple holes there. You can't see them because it's not very contrasty. So I'm going to mix that right in one of these holes between. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of yellow, and I'm going to pick it up from the side so I don't contaminate a lot of my yellow. It's all on this side. And then I'm going to be mixing in another little hole. I'm looking for something that looks very traditionally green. The color may not be perfect on here. That might have a little too much blue, so I'm going to add just a little bit more yellow. And even though it looks like I don't have a lot of paint, there's paint all in my brush. And I'm going to use this and paint in the green hole here, the green little box here. If I had gotten my brush wet in between there because I was worried about how much blue I had on my brush, I would want to make sure that it's nice and dry before I go back into my paint. You can use paper towel to dry, you could use newsprint, you could use a really old phone book if you still have one of those around. That's what I used when I first took painting, and they were a pretty regular occurrence. So not as much anymore these days. We're trying to get right to the edge. Maybe I needed a little bit more paint. Maybe I needed to mix a little bit more paint. So really the idea is that we get a thin coat of color that shows that we know how to make that color. In the past color theory videos, we used color pencils, and they were Crayola, so we were mixing right on the page. Sometimes Crayola don't mix as well, and we have to layer multiple times because of the items that they put into the pencil to make sure that they are less likely to break because they're used in school so much. So now I'm actually going to go ahead and go more lighter with more yellow to create my yellow green by just dipping right into that same side where I have my blue, because blue has green has blue in it, and I'm going to get a much more yellowy green here. I'm personally looking for more of a lime color. Maybe even as light as a limeade. And that looks pretty good. So let's see how it looks in between our green and our yellow. If you don't like the way it looks when you first put it down, immediately stop. You could pat that and try and pick up some of the color and paint back over. If you had more than one sheet, you could go ahead and get another sheet and paint another square that color if you don't like it, and paste it over later. You could also have a scrap of paper and test on your scrap of paper before you went to straight to your color wheel, which is probably the best idea. Don't have a scrap of paper here, so I'm hoping for the best. You can tap into a little corner here. Oh, I hit the paper. You can tap into little corners to try and get things into smaller spaces if you need to, and maybe I need to get a little bit more paint on my brush and I can go back over so it's nice and smooth. It's easier to see your brush strokes in the lighter colors, and like I said before, you can always add more. It's harder to take away, and multiple thin coats are always better than one thick coat, because your paper will start to buckle, and since we only have a little basic copy paper here,
May I have your attention, please? Miss Angela Williams, if you're in the building, please call attention 1121.
I'm sorry. Apparently I'm at school. So I'm going to use blue, and I'm going to add it back in here to try and get my blue-green. That's probably too blue.
Send this off.
Alright, so this is my blue-green. Right, that should be a nice gradual from yellow to blue going this way. I'm now going to wash my brush out in my water I have here. I'm going to put it all the way down to the bottom and use the bottom of the cup to agitate my bristles so that I get all of that paint out of there. If I really wanted to be a stickler, I could go straight to the sink. I could wash it with soap and water in the palm of my hand like I normally would. I would put the soap here, I lather up my brush, and then I rinse it out. And if it's not clear, I'll lather it up again and do the same. Because I am doing it at my own desk, I'm going to squeeze my brush and make sure it's as dry as possible as I can get with my paper towels here at the desk. So now I'm going to start working on the red to yellow. I'm going to wait to do these since they're at the bottom and I don't want to get my hand in it. You can go in any order you like. With the red and the blue is very intense, so I'm actually going to use a little less blue than would be half, just so that I can always add more. It's harder once I've added blue to add more red to get it to where I want to be. So, and again, I'm dipping in from the side, so I'm tainting that paint as little as possible. And I'm going to mix my blue and my red together. And I probably need more blue. More red. I could actually go ahead, normally I would be mixing straight to violet, but I have a pretty good blue violet here, so I'm going to go ahead and paint in my blue violet before I move on to violet. So blue violet and red violet are always going to be the darkest. Violet is one of the darkest colors. And part of that is because of where it appears in the light spectrum. It's just darker as a color, and that's why in a rainbow it appears on the end that it appears, because it's darker. So, and you may figure that out when you were using the colored pencils, and that you kind of go over and over, and it just wasn't looking like you liked, and then you didn't like the way it looked. All right, so now I'm going to add more red to get to violet, and then I'm going to add even more red to get to red violet. So, and I want to make sure that I mix it all well, that I don't have any blue or red spots that are still visible. Now I'm getting really close to my ferrule, which means that I just have to be really careful and don't let it dry on the brush before I wash it out. And we'll see how this goes. This looks pretty good for a violet right now because it's wet and this is still drying. It's going to look really close to the blue violet. But I think once we get the red violet on there, it'll look good. And if it doesn't, we can always mix more red in and go back over it. Which might work. This color might show through too as well. So it may not always work. Which is why I should have a scrap of paper here. Alright, again, remember we're trying to stay in the lines because we're practicing for our project where we create our own lines and then we stay inside them. Alright, I'm going to add more red. I might have to get more red after this in order to get my oranges and yellows. So I'm going to add more red. And your red violet is almost like a magenta. It's very pinked. Alright, let me go turn this light back on and I'll grab my red. Okay, sorry for that little break. And I'm going to see, I think I need more red, so I'm going to go a little bit more red in here. When you're mixing a large volume of paint and not just a little bit for something like this, instead of using our brush, I typically use a popsicle stick or the handle of a brush that has broken, maybe. I think I really want more red in there. I'm actually going to move to a new cup to try and get it a little bit more red. So I'm not mixing straight into that as much, and that means I can control what I get a little bit better. All right. Alright, so there's my red violet. I'm going to go ahead and wash my brush out because I still have blue in it, and I'm about to do red, orange, orange, yellow, orange, which is the complement. Orange is the complement of blue. So if I continue to mix using this brush, it's going to get all muddy and gross. So I'm going to go ahead and wash this really, really well in my water. And I actually have some on the ferrule, so I'm going to use my fingers up there. And now I'm going to really, really get it dry and make sure that there's not color coming off of it on my paper towel. And there's not. So now I'm going to mix red and yellow, and my red is pretty close to having an issue, so I can use some of this right here that's nice and clean and doesn't have any blue in it. I can use some of that. Let's see how good that works out. I had a little blue in it. Let me get that out. Alright, so now I'm going to go over here and I'm going to use from the other side of my yellow so that I don't incorporate any green in there. So we're going for an orange color. Remember, red is more pigmented than yellow, so I might need a little bit more yellow than red to get a nice medium toned orange. It's not always going to be 50-50. And this one looks pretty red already, so I'm going to get a little bit more yellow and keep mixing. I can also use my finger to get paint out of my brush so I can mix without contaminating as much. I'm going to go ahead and get all that yellow in there. Alright, so this orange looks pretty good. Again, I want to mix until I don't see any streaking, which is way more visible in the lighter colors like yellow and orange and green than it would be in the violets. So I'm going to use some of this. I'm going to go straight into my orange, which is right in the middle. Going to be careful and get right along the edge. And go slow and steady. Alright, we're painting like we're holding a regular old pencil. So speed is not the key. Although if you're talking and not painting, then you're not going to move fast at all and you're probably going to have a mistake. So make sure that you're also concentrating. Alright, so when I'm trying to get into this small little corner, I might want to move over to the side and come at it from the inside. The more I press my brush, the larger my brush gets. So, you know, if you're trying to get into a tiny little area, you want to not apply a lot of pressure to your brush. Alright, so there's my orange. I'm going to add more yellow in this cup over here and try and go a little bit more yellow orange. Boop. I'm actually going to squeeze my orange paint out into there from my brush like I did before with my finger so I can get all a little bit out. I'm going to get a little bit more yellow so I can go more yellow, and I'm actually going to go into this cup over here. Just water in my paint so that I don't mix it with this contaminated stuff here. So now I can get my yellow in. You can also mix in the middle, however, you know, if you're not careful, you'll start to get them mixing together. Alright, so now I'm going to go into my yellow orange. If you get it on the paper and you decide it needs more of something, the color on one side or the other, you can go ahead and pause and do it right now and then paint back over what you already have. Sometimes it works a little better when it's dry to cover, especially if it's violet or red violet or blue violet, those definitely need to be dry. Maybe I need a little more orange in there. It's sort of on the yellow side. If it's still wet, realize that the paint that you have on your brush is going to mix with the paint underneath, okay? So if your stuff underneath is too yellow and you're trying to add it more of an orange, so more on the red side, it will mix with what's underneath and you may not get exactly what you were hoping for. Alright, so now I'm going to add some red to this color so that I can go to my red orange, and then we'll have completed our color wheel. And then in the next video I'll be talking about low intensity, high intensity, and tints and shades, okay? So a little bit more red here, and I am going to use my brush and mix it right here. Make sure you're not going too red because you want it to look different than the red here. So I'm going to add a little bit more orange in there. Let's see. Maybe just a little bit more. I can actually even take my yellow over here. That is probably too real orange. Alright, so last one. Now, if you feel like the yellow green and the green and the blue green are too thin and you can see the brush strokes, you could go back over them after you wash out your brush and try to do another coat if you feel like they need that. That is not, it's not red enough. So I'm going to go back and get more red. Alright, and in the next section I'm going to come back and I'll talk about this stuff.